If you're watching this video, more than likely you're aware of the three patterns that make up a gap. Those three patterns are identical patterns. The touch patterns, either down touch or up touch in the trend chart, and the proximity group patterns. Within the proximity group are, we're basically talking about the power lines and, excuse me, the Power 3 lines are the blue, pink, and white line. The Power 4 lines are the blue, pink, and yellow line together. And those are two pairs. Keep in mind the Power pink and blue are deep cycle indicators. The only one better than Power pink as far as a deep cycle is concerned is your swing gray. And the white and yellow line, the Power white and yellow lines, are also a pair. And oftentimes those two pairs are divergent to each other when we have gaps. And there are many other types of divergence, but I'm not going to get into the divergence in this video. I wanted to explain also the Power 5 is the Power 4 and Power Zion. And Power Zion and the Power 4 together are probably the most popular group of lines that we watch. And Zion is divergent to the Power 4 more often probably than any other line. And there's two types of divergence. The Power Zion can be going down and the Power 4 can be going up. That's directional divergence. Location divergence is when Power Zion is under Power Orange line and the Power 4 is above the Power Orange line. And you can get Power Zion under Orange and Power 3 above Orange. And then, of course, your Power Yellow is under Orange as well. The reason that we talk about Power 3 is that oftentimes yellow is separated from the other three lines, and it runs independently and separately from the other two. And that has to do, if you think about the twin yellow pair, we talk about zip yellow and power yellow. And when those two are highest and going down, we have a downtrend. When they're lowest, both lowest and going up, you have an uptrend. And just for your information, when one of the lines gets buried underneath another line, one of the other lines on the chart, the pattern technically ends, but that does not mean that the trend direction will end. It certainly can end, but it also can go up or continue in the direction that it has been going. Sometimes I'll refer to the Power 6, and that would add Power Red, and they could all be above the orange line. And in fact, most of the time when I talk about the Power 5 being above the orange line or under the orange line, the red is in the same area because it's a much faster line. Red is a position indicator, meaning when it's above zero, price tends to go up. When it's under zero, price tends to go down. Basically kind of like when it's moving flat. Obviously, when it's down and climbing up real fast, then you're going up. But generally speaking, all of those power lines are in a way a position indicator. You'll especially see that if, for example, the Power 4 crosses over the Power Orange line on the same day. You'll typically get a gap or a big green candle. And the flip-flop is true as well when it crosses under the orange line. And oftentimes when it crosses under the orange line, it also crosses under the 0 line, but those can be separate issues. Now, all of that being said about the Power 3, 4, 5, and 6, it has to do with its relation in location, proximity location patterns. And by that I mean that for example, the power yellow can be above 0 and the power 3 can be under 0. That is a good condition for a gap. And normally it's a gap up, but it can be the other way around. Another good proximity location grouping pattern is with cyan under power orange and the power 4 above power orange. And that is true also with cyan under orange and the power 3 above power orange. Excuse me. All of those are location patterns, and by that I mean you've got basically two types of, there's two types of patterns in the proximity group. You've got the patterns that fall into shapes. In other words, they're a BOC or a TOC or a bottlenose or some other shape of a pattern. There's actually a 7 pattern group or 7 shape patterns, if you will, that define the patterns that normally appear when a gap occurs. More important than shapes is location, because when the location fits the criteria for a gap, it more often than not happens that it's going to be a gap. Sometimes it'll happen a couple days in a row. But so the second or the third day, you would have the gap. But shapes can appear at different times, but no location is established. No location pattern is established. And so we get when we're looking for gaps, and it's real easy to find identical patterns. You find 12 or more identical patterns. They of course can be in 1 pattern groups or 2 pattern groups, meaning all 12 or 14 of them are in 1 BOC pattern. You can have 9 of them in a BOC pattern and 3 of them in a bottlenose pattern up. So that would be a 2 pattern grouping with 9 and 3. The total is 12. So we want to see whether it's a 1, 2, or a 3 pattern grouping. We want to see at least 12 indicators being identical within the 2 groups or 3 groups or whatever you have. The greater the number of 1 identical patterns is typically best. But I have seen 7, 7, and 7, meaning 7 indicator lines were in 1 group, 7 different lines were in a second group, and 7 indicator lines different from both of those previous 2 groups were in a third group. And so we had 21 patterns in that gap that I saw, 7, 7, and 7. We will sometimes see gaps with 9, and it'll still gap up nicely. But oftentimes we want to see, we basically have a requirement in 1 or 2 patterns that it has 12 or more. Now, back to the location issue of the proximity group. Even though we can easily spot identical indicators, even though we can easily spot down touches or up touches in the trend chart, the difficulty in identifying with gaps, at least for most of us, is the proximity group patterns, because there is such a huge variety of available location patterns. I previously described several examples. You can one of the most popular is with Zion under orange and the others above orange, either the Power3 or the Power4. With those conditions, the pattern has been established. With the pattern established, you just need to verify that the shapes of the pattern are there, either in a BOC shape, can be a 1 day or a 2 day, can be a TOC shape, 1 day or 2 day, can be a bottle nose, can be 3 days up or 3 days down. Whatever it is, the shapes are secondary to the location. We always want to find the location first and then the pattern shapes in the proximity group. Now, within the there's document files that identify the proximity location gap down patterns and the proximity location gap up patterns, and those are and those explain. I've given at least one example of each different location, so that we can see first off the locations, the different locations that will support a gap up or a gap down condition, or results next day. It may be a more effective way of saying it. So within the proximity group, you have to have the location and you have to have the shape. But in my opinion, it's easier to first find the location and then find the shape. And the reason for that is because the shapes will oftentimes, or I shouldn't say often, you can find shapes that don't have location. And that just doesn't work. Most of the time when that happens, you also don't have all three pattern groups, either the down touches or the identical indicators, doing the job, or appearing at the same time. So then it becomes null and void anyway. But typically we really concentrate on the location, and by going to the proximity location gap up patterns or the proximity location gap down patterns, you will be able to, there's a symbol and a date example, and then all of the conditions, all of the primary conditions for that gap are listed in that example. And there's, 10 or 12 in each probably, depends on how you look at it. 10 or 12 examples, but some of them are fairly similar. Excuse me. So that kind of summarizes the reasons that we identify with Power3, Power4, and Power5, and why we need to identify with them in our discussion of gaps.